My coaching work centers around reframing and rewriting harmful narratives, both in toxic workplace culture and also toxic relationships and families of origin, and really addressing harmful narratives that prevent women from moving forward in their lives in a self actualized way. And this comes up very much to the forefront of conversation when holidays are approaching. I have a related video talking about setting boundaries during the holiday season, and this is sort of an extension of that, particularly as one approaches Thanksgiving. During 2020, as the pandemic was becoming increasingly intense and really facing the first holiday season where people were unable to gather in the ways that we had done before, I was the pastor of a small church and kind of ministering to this congregation during this very difficult time and trying to create messages of hope and healing during a really difficult time. And as we approached Thanksgiving, again, the first kind of formal nationally celebrated holiday amid the pandemic where people had already experienced a significant amount of loss, death, and isolation during the pandemic. It was an opportunity for me to offer, I think, a really important message, one that I needed for myself. And that is that the original Thanksgiving that we think about in terms of the coming together of the Native American community in Massachusetts and the early settlers and the Pilgrims, that there was a deeper narrative there that, at least in my own education and understanding of Thanksgiving, had never really heard before, which is the fact that these two communities coming together, in addition to having the celebration of this harvest together, and the fact that they had really gathered resources together in a way that would promote both of their own survival, there was a real deep sense of shared grief. This is something that I was not aware of, and I'll share it here. The landing of the Mayflower in Plymouth, which actually is not the Native American, as you can imagine, term for that. The name for that community is Patuxet. When the Pilgrims arrived, the area was uninhabited because there had been a widespread epidemic for the past 3 years that the majority of the Wampanoag community, the Native American community in that area of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, had been almost entirely wiped out. And in that particular location, it was uninhabited because the community there were so few survivors of that epidemic. So when the Pilgrims arrived and sort of claimed that as their area, there was history there and one of deep, deep loss and death. That was something also that the Pilgrims were very familiar with their long and dangerous journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Very few survived that trip, that long journey, and then also during that first year and that first winter, very few survived as well. So both of these communities were left in many ways a similar state of grief, of loss, of misery, of hopelessness. And that first year after the Pilgrims arrived, the alliance between these two communities had been established, and sharing of resources and knowledge, in particular the growing of crops, which I'll link another video to as well, and the tradition of Three Sisters companion planting was something that was introduced to the Pilgrims and ultimately enabled their survival. So the coming together of these two communities is and was very powerful and says a lot more about this celebration that I think can give people a lot more context, a lot more depth, a lot more meaning. So when we look at Thanksgiving and coming together, people have so many different traditions around this, many of which I think are helpful and worth promoting, but others that perhaps are stifling genuine and authentic relationship. And so as we approach this celebration, this holiday, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind, again, as I focus on rewriting harmful narratives, toxic narratives, reclaiming agency, autonomy, and authentic understandings of self. First is to really look at relationships and the realness of what's happening in relationships. So if you look at that original Thanksgiving with the Native American Wampanoag community and the early Pilgrims, yes, there may have been this coming together of these two really broken and grieving communities at that time. But as we know through history now, unfortunately, this is becoming more transparent. Moving forward, that relationship became more and more fraught, and more power and control was placed over the Native American communities, and ultimately leading to the loss of their sacred land and their rights. And so understanding that first Thanksgiving was ultimately sort of the precursor to what has become a really devastating and unjust and inhumane part of the history of the United States. And really acknowledging that as we come into this time of celebration, I think also helps us look very clearly at the relationships in our own lives and asking ourselves, what are these relationships really about? Are they promoting mutual well-being? Are they promoting mutual understanding? Do each of the parties, if you're looking at family systems, are people's full self and identity being acknowledged and accepted? And if that's not the case, asking oneself, are these relationships that are worth promoting or even suppressing some of that truth just for the sake of kind of family get-togethers? And these are really important questions to ask, and each of us will have different responses and ways of navigating those challenges. I think it's also very important to not dilute our emotions during these times. I think holidays in any context and ritual, for that matter, can bring up feelings, unresolved grief, unresolved pain, for some people, unresolved trauma with relation to our families or our circumstances, our relationships, our work. And when we use these ritualistic times as an opportunity to potentially promote further healing, I think it does help us move into these times of celebration with more authenticity. And again, asking yourself, are the people you're choosing to celebrate these rituals with promoting that self-growth and that healing in a way that's conducive and productive? Or are people sort of actively preventing that kind of healing in your own life? So asking yourself again, are these spaces that allow me to feel psychologically safe and that my well-being is promoted? And as we honor emotion during this season, I think it very much honors that original Thanksgiving of honoring not only this abundance of harvest that is sort of the external reasons for the coming together of these two communities, but really it was an honoring of shared grief. And really using that more authentic story of Thanksgiving as a way to give ourselves permission to then look deeply at our own life circumstances and ask ourselves, where is there unaddressed hurt, unaddressed grief or loss, and using this time as an opportunity to tend to that in a really caring and compassionate way.